The religious are seriously confused when it comes to the truth. They're convinced that feeling good is all that's required for being true, and that is not remotely the fact. So let's get to a new video where the religious make complete fools of themselves and prove once again that their beliefs are laughably absurd. Because that never gets old, does it? Today, we're going to take a look at a video from Apologetics Squared, and this might actually be one of the worst apologetic arguments that I've seen, maybe ever. The argument that people believe it, so it's gotta be true. And yes, it is really as stupid as that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's a preamble that comes first, and somehow he tries to make sense and fails miserably. I mean, this is religion after all. What more can you expect? I'll go ahead and I'll answer that for you right now. No, that is not evidence for anything. People claim that there is a divine something. They can't demonstrate that it actually exists. Then they just make excuses for why they can't demonstrate that it exists by claiming that God is the head of the leaderboard of the longest running game of hide and seek in history. That's my analogy, and of course it's not original to me. Don't argue that's not the way they put it, I already know. But we can do the exact same thing with any God out there. In fact, with anything that we can just make up. Invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. Well, they're just hiding, that's why we can't prove they're real. Well, what does that actually prove? Only that I've got a good imagination, at least in this particular example. So, no, this isn't going to get him anywhere. So, let's watch him blow it completely.
Hello! A standard defense of the Christian faith will involve defending two propositions. 1. God exists. 2. If God exists, then Christianity is true.
The problem is, you've never gotten remotely close to the first one, and even if you did, that doesn't prove that Christianity is true. First, we have to ask ourselves what you mean by God, and more important, how do you know that? Let's show him why this doesn't work, because it's not that hard to do. You can make anything up that you'd like. Bobo the tree god, and I did make that one up based on a real tree that once lived in my backyard, at least until it got blown over in a windstorm. I can tell you everything that you'd ever want to know about Bobo because, as I said, I just made it up. If I convinced somebody else that Bobo was real, they could repeat all of the things that I invented about Bobo, but that wouldn't make any of it true, would it? If this game of telephone goes on for 2,000 years, or say somebody writes it all down in a book that becomes widely accepted, that doesn't make any of it true. The only way for it to be true is if it can be objectively and independently demonstrated to have actually happened as described in the real world. So I really don't think he's off to a good start here, do you?
The first of these is supported with cosmological, ontological, teleological, axiological, and many other different arguments.
All of which have been completely debunked by a whole host of different people, including myself. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. Generally speaking, the reason why they all fail is because they are all based on empty claims, not demonstrable evidence that can be supported in the real world, and that's really all that counts. Your fifis and your faith don't matter. So point one is empty and unsupported in any kind of rational way. Can he do better on the next one? Let's see.
The second proposition here is defended with the resurrection argument.
Which isn't an argument, it's a claim. You've presented no demonstrable evidence that it ever happened. In fact, you've presented no evidence that Jesus ever existed at all, that he ever was crucified, and certainly not that he ever came back from the dead like a Jewish zombie. Just because you really want it to be true that doesn't mean that it is. As we see so often, this is why they don't want to talk to us directly, because we're not going to buy into their faith-based empty claims, and their arguments all depend on that. So that's 2 down. What's next?
Huh. That resurrection argument looks a little lonely. In this video, we're going to give it a friend, the hiddenness argument.
And as I said at the very beginning, that is not going to get him anywhere. Yet, before we let him get into that, let's look at his conclusion. Even if the first 2 were true, and there's no reason at all to think that they are, but let's be charitable and say he's done more than just flap his lips, it still wouldn't prove that Christianity was true. Even if you could prove that Jesus came back from the dead, that doesn't prove that God done it. Maybe it was aliens. Maybe it was a God that has nothing at all to do with Christianity. There are tons of possibilities that don't lead to the conclusion that he desperately wants to reach. This is why they don't want to have rational discussions with non-believers, because we're not going to buy into their bunk.
But before we can give this argument for Christianity, we need to look at an argument against theism, the argument from Divine Hiddenness. A skeptic could say, look, if theism is true, then there is an infinitely loving God. But if he is infinitely loving, then he desires to be in a relationship with all creatures, including me.
But that's not necessarily the case, is it? He said theism, not Christianity. There are lots of different theistic religions that don't propose a loving God. It's almost like he isn't paying attention to what he's saying. He's just rushing so fast toward his desired outcome that he's not considering the ramifications of his words. Well, that can't be right, can it? Let me know what you think down in the comments.
And I am completely open to that. I would love to be in a relationship with the supremely good creator of the universe. But I can't do that because I don't believe in God.
That part is entirely irrelevant. If God wanted to introduce himself to me in some way that is not deniable, then I wouldn't be able to deny it, would I? So why hasn't he done that? He's desperately trying to put the blame on atheists, not on his imaginary friend, and that's a problem, isn't it? It's why we have to look at the words that they're using, because they usually betray their own ridiculous biases.
This is a situation God could easily remedy if he just revealed himself to me, so why hasn't he? This is an interesting argument. Now, the problem this argument poses for theists is not that it's completely inexplicable why God is hidden from some individuals.
Try all individuals, because nobody has yet presented any reason to think that he's ever revealed himself to anybody in any verifiable way. Now, certainly there are people who will tell you some pretty tall tales and jump to unwarranted conclusions, but that's not actually evidence of anything. Lots of people from lots of religions say the same thing about their own gods. Does that prove that those gods are real? Hell, they say that about Bigfoot and aliens and the Loch Ness Monster too. Does that prove that those things exist? So even if I might be getting ahead of myself here, he's just not acquitting himself well. And that's not particularly surprising, is it?
The main concern is that once a theist does include an explanation in their worldview, that worldview gets more complex than theism on its own.
Because worldviews are entirely meaningless. Here's why. In his drawing, he's got theism plus an explanation. Well, how do we determine if that explanation is actually true? Because we're actually here after truth. The one that he presents here, which reads, "In all feasible worlds, with a high proportion of saved individuals, non-resistant non-believers exist." Well, how do you demonstrate that anyone is saved? That relies on the faith position that a god or some gods exist, and as we already said, that is not demonstrably true. Your fifis don't mean anything. This is where virtually all theistic positions fall apart, because they almost all rely on emotional positions to get to non-demonstrable conclusions, and that is not a good way to get to any actual truth propositions. I don't care what you claim is the truth. I care what you can demonstrate is the truth. You got to do a whole lot better than that.
And hypotheses that are more complex are intrinsically less probable and therefore need more evidence.
Which sucks for you because you have no evidence at all. You only have claims, and claims are not evidence of anything. And this is why religion completely falls apart, but let's let him explain just because.
So the blow that Divine Hiddenness gives to theism is that it raises the amount of evidence theists need to give.
Not really. I think this, like the argument from evil, are just arguments against the arbitrarily assigned definitions that theists make up about their gods, not against the actual gods themselves. Gods, all gods, need to be objectively proven before anybody should take them seriously. This is not a philosophy question, this is a scientific one. These are just empty claims that the religious are making about their gods. How do they justify that they know these things in the first place? It's a fair question that they have absolutely no means whatsoever to answer, because your faith just doesn't count.
I obviously think that theism can reach this bar due to those aforementioned arguments, but that's not the focus of this video. I want to point out that it's not just the fact that there are non-resistant non-believers, but the amount of them matters too. If there were no non-resistant non-believers, there wouldn't be any problem. But the more and more people who turned out to be non-resistant non-believers, the more and more complex explanations theists would need to give, and the more evidence theism would require.
And since more and more people are walking away from theism, it looks like they're not doing a very good job, doesn't it? It doesn't really matter how many non-believers there are, though. The believers still have a cognitive requirement to provide evidence for the things that they claim are true. And they have failed in this miserably. Even if there were no non-believers, they'd still have to prove their case, even if absolutely everybody already believed it. The rational requirements don't change based on the size of your opposition. You're just being an idiot.
We can represent this correlation graphically, but this isn't composed of any hard numbers or anything. Coolio. Now let's rerun the argument from Divine Hiddenness, but with a specific version of theism in mind. I'm going to use Islam for this example. If Islam is true, then presumably there is a loving God who is therefore open to relationship with me.
According to Muslims, at least most Muslims, that's true, but they have no more evidence for this claim than you do. Again, there are plenty of religions that don't purport to have a loving God, so he can't just shove any religion in there and make a valid point. It's why all of this is so obviously cherry-picked, but we'll let that slide for the moment. So, what's your point?
But even though I'm a theist, with regards to Islam, I am a non-resistant non-believer. If I knew Islam was true, I would follow Islam. And Allah could make sure I knew Islam was true by revealing himself to me. So why hasn't he revealed himself?
Because, based on all the evidence that we have, Allah isn't real. That was simple, wasn't it? Every single thing that he's going to say about Islam, I'm predicting anyway, will be just as applicable to Christianity. He just won't acknowledge it. Let's see if I'm right.
We can now reuse our previous graph with Islam in mind rather than just bare theism. As the proportion of non-resistant non-Muslims like me goes up, the amount of additional evidence Islam needs to bring to the table also goes up.
No, it doesn't. Perhaps the number of people who are actively critical of Islam goes up, but the evidential requirements never change. If you're going to be a rational person, which I don't think he is, but if you were, you still have to have evidence to defend your claims. Just because nobody is demanding you to produce it, that doesn't mean that you don't have to. And this is all getting a little silly.
This also applies for Christianity, Odinism, Zeus worshippers, and so on. The religions with more adherents are going to be closer to over here, and have an easier time explaining why there are non-resistant non-believers regarding their religion.
Only to the people who already believe, because those are the only ones who are going to care about that explanation. Actually, explanation isn't even the right word. What you're doing here is just rationalizing why your religion doesn't need to back up any of its claims, almost entirely for emotional reasons. This isn't an actual defense of your position. It's just an emotional dodge. And that's kind of sad, right?
And the religions with fewer adherents are going to be over here and have a harder time explaining why there are so many non-resistant non-believers with regards to their religion.
It happens all the time. In fact, early Christianity was on that end of the spectrum. That's what happens when you start off as a mystery religion. We have a secret that nobody else knows. Granted, at the time, nobody was arguing that God was hiding from detection. That's a relatively recent development. It's what happens once science and rational thought becomes commonplace. If everybody's a faithful moron, then they don't bother asking those questions, so you don't have to provide those answers. It's what religion really wants to get back to, and sorry, that time is long gone forever.
So, religions with more adherents, all else being equal, should be believed rather than religions with fewer adherents.
No, that's just constructing echo chambers where people just don't ask the hard questions, or the religious just have the ability to quash their critics, as happened with Christianity for a very, very, very long time. If you didn't profess belief, you wound up very, very dead. Ask Giordano Bruno if you don't believe me, or you wind up miserable under house arrest for the rest of your life. Just ask Galileo. When you've got political power, you can impose your beliefs on others, and they don't dare open their mouths. That doesn't make your beliefs true, though. It just makes you an asshole. Why is it that so many Christians seem happy to be assholes? I mean, just asking for a friend.
Here's another way to explain my argument. Imagine that God exists and some religion, which we'll call religion X, is true. God, being all-powerful and all-loving, would want people to know true things about him so they could have a better relationship with him.
Where did you yank that nugget out of? Because this is just an assertion, nothing more. You are defining your God as loving and powerful, which you can't prove is actually the case. Then you're just filling this fanciful God's mouth with all of these things you'd really like him to say, but you can't prove he actually said it. Why would I imagine any of this if you can't justify it in any way? Because this is how religion works. This is why it's so clear that they don't know the difference between if and because. It's not if God exists, it's because God exists. And then there's all the things that they tell themselves about their imaginary friend that they're expecting you to play along with for the sake of argument. And I don't do that. Not until you can back it up in any objectively verifiable, demonstrable way. Get to work.
So he would want as many people to believe religion X as possible. Thus, if we knew nothing except that God exists and religion X was true, should we expect religion X to be unpopular or popular?
Who cares? That's why I really hate these if questions, because they don't actually mean anything. First, there is no religion out there anywhere that's actually demonstrably true. It doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what you can prove, and you people can't prove anything. So this is a meaningless proposition without more information. It's like saying, if Bigfoot is real. Well, why would we even consider the proposition without some reason to think that it might be so? Your fifis don't matter. I mean, there are plenty of really popular things out there that are based on entirely unreal things. So what does that have to do with anything? Harry Potter is hugely popular, at least it was. It's still complete fantasy nonsense. Star Wars was insanely popular, at least till Disney screwed it all up, but it's still not real. This is just a theist trying to distract the viewer by appealing to popularity instead of truth. Wow, look how popular we are. That means we have to be right. No, it just means a lot of people are dumb. There's a fallacy for that, and I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out which one.
Obviously, it would be popular. So if you become convinced that there is a God, just look at the popularity of the world religions to try and figure out which one is religion X, the true religion.
That is not how any of that works. This is just an appeal to popularity. Damn, okay, that was the fallacy right there. Sorry, didn't mean to let the cat out of the bag. It doesn't matter how popular a thing is. That doesn't have any bearing on its truth value. Is this guy really that stupid? Or is that yet another question we really don't have to ask?
Obviously, no religion is believed by everyone, so something like human free will or whatnot has complicated the matter for God. But it still stands to reason that the more popular a religion is, the more probable it is that it's the one with an omnipotent God on its side.
No, that's idiotic. How can you be so fractally wrong about absolutely everything? That's like saying that because once upon a time the overwhelming majority of people believed that the earth was flat, therefore it was. Truth has nothing at all to do with popularity. Truth is not a matter of opinion. Are you really this stupid? I know I keep asking, but geez.
And there's this one religion centered around this first century rabbi that's like really popular. In fact, you'll be kind of hard pressed to find a more popular one. So you should really just believe that one.
Who out there thinks that this argument is going to go away when Islam takes over as the most popular religion on the planet? Because right now, it looks like Christianity only has another maybe 30 to 40 years in it at the top spot, after which it's going to be in the minority. Hopefully by 2070 or so, at least in the US, secularism will take over and Christianities will be in the vast minority where it belongs. Wonder what they're going to say then.
Yeah. Before I go, I want to talk about Islam some more. In regards to large monotheistic religions, it seems to be Christianity's biggest rival. So if Christianity is true, then why did God even allow Islam to come into existence?
Because God isn't true? Because this is a stupid question asked by a stupid person? I mean, we could go on and on and on. Maybe he's getting ready for the day when Christianity falls into the minority and he can't pretend that popularity means truth anymore. Well, he can't pretend that now if he was rational, which clearly he's not. But let's see what he has to say.
Well, here are my thoughts. If some religion X is true, but due to human free will or something, there is some difficulty God has in propagating it, it makes sense to allow a religion similar to religion X to spring up, so that followers of that religion can still be brought closer to religion X, even if they can't be brought all the way to it.
That is utterly idiotic. This is just bald rationalization, folks. It's kind of what they do. But let me ask you this. Maybe Islam is the true religion and Christianity exists as something close to Islam to help people get into the vicinity of the only one true religion. He won't even consider that one, will he? Or maybe Judaism was true and Christianity and Islam both popped up. Well, you get the idea. I mean, I know we're just arguing bald rationalizations here because that's all the religious seem capable of, but he's not going to see where the problems of his own ideas lie because he doesn't want to. This is the part where we just sit back and laugh and laugh and laugh at all of the religious stupidity because he's just making a fool of himself. What else is new?
A Muslim could also use the very same logic to explain why Allah allowed the propagation of Christianity. So, interestingly enough, if you think that divine hiddenness is a sizable problem for theism, then you should also believe that, if theism is true, then Christianity is probably the true religion, although it's worth taking a look at Islam too, just to be safe.
No, because none of that remotely follows. This is just a dodge, and a particularly pathetic one at that. He started off talking about divine hiddenness, which I don't think anybody takes all that seriously to begin with, but he's got to keep making content, and I guess they can't all be gems. Or, in this case, any of them, to be honest. Then he just went straight off into La La Land and started talking complete nonsense because, well, you know, religion. But this is just abjectly stupid, isn't it? Truth doesn't work that way, but he's not actually concerned with truth. He only cares about his own pathetic fifis and trying desperately to justify his ridiculous beliefs, at least to himself and to his followers. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?
All of that is something a non-theist could totally agree with.
If by agree you mean laugh at, then sure. But that's about as far as it goes.
And I think they should, if they want to be consistent with their advocacy of the argument from divine hiddenness. But that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support me on Patreon if you enjoy this content.
No. Because this is one of the most laughable things that I've seen lately, and if I didn't know better, I'd say he was just shitposting for a laugh. You cannot take this stuff seriously. You just can't. I think this points to the utter desperation that a lot of Christians, and to be fair, other religions are just as bad, when it comes to trying to rationalize their blind faith. They have no actual evidence. We all know that, which is why they turn to an endless string of logical fallacies, just like this one, as a means to shore up their insane beliefs in their own heads. Because, as we all know, they don't actually care if any of it's true. They just want to believe. But that's just idiotic if you believe things that are so absurd that this is the best you can present. This is little better than, well, I said so, so there. Anybody can do that, and for most religions, that's all they've got. My book said a thing, and I like it, so it's true. Yeah, but you people don't have a rational clue, do you? That's what makes religion so pathetic. You wind up with bozos like this. It might be good for a laugh, but not for anything else. Maybe you people ought to work on that, because until you do, you're not good as anything but a joke.